The claim made by Google, this is the best smartphone camera anyone has ever made.
So let me just put that score into context. This isn't only the best camera we've ever made. It's the best smartphone camera anyone has ever made.
That's a tall order, so it's time to put the Pixel XL to the ultimate photo and video test in our real camera review. Buckle up, folks, we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm gonna move pretty quick. First, for you specs junkies, you can pause the video here to see what hardware we're working with. With that out of the way, jumping into some outdoor daylight shots, we're going to upset some in our audience. The Pixel is largely designed to be used in some form of HDR or auto processing mode. But keeping our samples consistent against the other phones we review, most of the samples here were shot with HDR disabled, and we'll discuss high dynamic range in the appropriate sections of this review. We want to keep this in oranges to oranges comparison opposite our other real camera reviews. Looking at exposure, the Pixel is working to produce bright, vivid, contrasty images which will look incredible on the phone's AMOLED display. As such, when left to decide every photo setting on its own, the camera routinely pushes a little brighter than it needs to. Blues and greens look very good. There's a juicy color saturation happening here which is eye-pleasing. The uniform sections of the sky have a very fine pattern grain which is appreciated and won't distract from your subject. Likewise, browns and earth tones arrive appropriately warm, but avoid that exaggeration which might push them into orange territory. We are starting to clip some fine details on these yellow flowers though, which is a shame. Not an area HDR could have helped save this shot. And reds are difficult to capture on any digital sensor, but they're even trickier to get a handle on here as this camera aggressively adjusts exposure for where you focus. Many cameras employ some kind of spot metering, but focusing on different parts of this hibiscus, we arrive at very different metering values, which produce very different results. We do better than most in retaining fine detail, but warmer colors on the Pixel can start to sizzle. And a white flower in direct sun, the Pixel does a great job of retaining petal detail with only the brightest sections of the flower starting to blow out. Moving to white balance, the Pixel errs on the side of satisfying a consumer more than delivering accuracy. But the camera avoids pushing too warm in California afternoon light, nor does it drive too cold in shaded shots. I think we're finding a very happy balance in these finished JPEGs. It's a good thing too, as while the Pixel has rudimentary white balance controls, there are only 4 presets here, which aren't particularly useful given how wide a range they're trying to represent. Now, the Pixel does not have the ability to natively capture RAW files, but it will support RAW capture in third-party apps. So we're breaking our rule here, using another camera app to take a look at a RAW file. Purposely overexposing, we can walk the image back about 2.5 stops to recover some information in this blown-out exterior. Considering the Pixel's penchant for punchy exposure, it's a shame we don't have RAW capture built into this app. Speaking of the app layout, it's a simple Google camera view. Shutter on the right, modes available on the left through a swipe gesture, and settings on the top of the viewfinder to change HDR and flash options. It's a nicely simplified view for no-fuss photography. Though we wish there was a little more meat here for people who do enjoy adjusting settings. So checking out the zoom, we ran into some issues. What you see is not always what you get. First, though the Pixel limits the zoom range more than some competitors might, there isn't a lot of resolution to play with on this sensor. So at maximum zoom, expect some image degradation, but thanks to that limit, results here are competitive for a software crop zoom. The problem stems from the crop factor applied to the image on the sensor and how that does not line up with your viewfinder. I was not trying to cut off the top of this palm tree. According to my viewfinder, I framed close to the upper edge of the screen, but the output was saved a lot lower than what I was seeing. We would consider this to be a significant software issue, not being able to trust that what the camera is showing you while shooting is not what you will save when you finish recording. We're really hoping this will be addressed in a future software update. Macro focusing distances are also competitive, and you can get pretty close, though it's tough to always tell at macro distances whether your subject is really in focus or not. You don't get a lot of feedback from this circle focus indicator. It would be nice if it would turn red for times that your subject is not in focus. Thanks to this 1/2.3-inch sensor though, it's not difficult at all to blur your background and capture some tasty bokeh. And while the focus reporting can sometimes be a bit wonky, the focusing action is lightning fast. Pixel is the closest competitor this year to the Galaxy S7, and we'd be hard-pressed to declare an outright victor here for speed and accuracy. Very well done by Google. Damn, and you thought flaring on LG cameras was bad. Unfortunately, the lens on the Pixel will not go down as one of our favorites. It's very much prone to flaring, like J.J. Abrams flaring, and color flaring, and producing this ring halo flaring. Google has already acknowledged this is a hardware issue and one they won't be fixing while manufacturing this generation of Pixel. Instead, they'll try to address a hardware issue with a software fix. But that image processing correction will only be available if you shoot in the HDR Plus mode. Extremely disappointing, as it's one of those can't unsee kinds of defects, and your eye is instantly drawn to it when it pops up in one of your images. So now we get to the HDR mode, and it really is Google's catch-all mode. This is where Google fixes overexposure issues, washed out color issues, and will be where they try to fix lens defect issues. HDR Plus has a lot riding on it, so we're happy to report this is a phenomenal HDR mode. Google takes top marks for balancing highlights and lowlights, bringing down the brightest areas of your frame while filling in any underexposed sections of your shot. Looking at numerous test photos, we feel this image processing just edges out the iPhone for producing those punchy, colorful, bright shots that people tend to enjoy. Google really did land something special on this iteration of HDR+. But it's still in HDR mode, so for those people who don't enjoy the processed look of high dynamic range, there are very few options available out of the box to help you achieve the shots you want. Looking at how good HDR processing is just makes panorama stitching all the more disappointing. Seriously, we're still doing the line up the dots thing? I love taking panorama shots from iPhones, Galaxies, LGs, Huaweis, which all scan smoothly through your scene. I've yet to complete a panorama like this where there weren't some big gaps or stitching errors. So you should all know by now that I hate selfie cameras, but the front shooter on the Pixel is better than most. We do run into processing consistency issues though. Letting the camera decide everything doesn't always mean it will make the choices you want. Also in shade, there were some metering issues. About 1 out of 5, the camera would expose more for the background even though I was occupying the focus. Video is nicely detailed and the software does a very good job of adjusting to changes in exposure, but it still is shaky. It would be nice to employ some of the crop stabilization to the front shooter too. Moving to low light, this camera is utterly fearless at cranking up the ISO to produce bright images. Again, pushing brighter than the scene usually warrants. HDR Plus can tame some of that noise, but HDR shots take significantly longer to process in dark conditions, so this won't be ideal if you or your subject is moving. Our creepy tunnel is a perfect showcase for the issues with lens flaring and overexposure. The auto modes here are a bummer when trying to correct for that brightness. This was as dark as I could go. It's a much better representation of the shot, but I had to max out the exposure compensation to get here. And if I wanted a darker or a moodier shot, I can't do it in the camera app. Our walkway fared better with terrific color accuracy between these two white bulbs, though the clip sections below each light are a touch larger than I'd like to see. Pixel does very well with our creepy gate, getting pretty close to the ugly yellow light which washes this alley. But the white balance adjustments in the app are pretty poor. Looking through the 4 presets, there's no way in camera to correct for the yellow light. 3 of the 4 presets look nearly identical. And a flower in almost total darkness. It's blurry from noise reduction, but this thing cranked the ISO to an astounding 4500 to pull an image out of almost no light. By comparison, the highest ISO an LG V20 will let you shoot is 3200. And moving to video, the Pixel captures a respectable, though not class-leading, 40 megabit per second bitrate UHD file, which eats around 300 megabytes per minute of video. Likely a compromise on file sizes given the Pixel's lack of expandable storage options. Video for the most part follows the same aesthetic as stills, punchy, contrasty, and a touch on the bright side. We can get a better look at the metering here. Left to its own devices, these bougainvillea blossoms are overexposed, but dropping the exposure down 1 1/3 to 1.5 stops, we get a better look at the flowers and pull more info out of the surrounding area. Focusing on the tree, we get a bright, vivid scene. Output from competing phones like the V20 might seem dull by comparison, but there's more info to work with on the LG, so we can get pretty close to recreating the look of the Pixel with a quick boost to brightness and contrast. The Pixel, on the other hand, can't replace the info which was lost in clipped highlights. But what about that shake, that shimmy? Google's software image stabilization is terrific. Shots where you and your subject are still, it almost looks like you have the phone on a tripod. Walking is also handled really well, avoiding the lens wobble of hardware stabilization and easily competing with what Apple has to offer here. It isn't difficult to get this phone to twitch though. Back to our tree scene, because the tree is moving in a medium breeze, we see the phone trying to adjust where it probably doesn't need to. Also, panning movements can sometimes produce abrupt shifts in stabilization. Lastly, longer shutter speeds will produce ghosting in some of these corrections. We've never actually traveled down the creepy tunnel at night, have we? That's pretty spooky. In all though, this is one of the better implementations of stabilization we've seen on any smartphone. But what do we hear on some of these video files? Now, some have declared the Pixel Google's iPhone, and when it comes to audio, that's an apt comparison, as this phone only records mono audio while shooting video. Thankfully, the noise reduction is even-handed, preventing any overt destruction while minimizing constant background noise. You don't get stereo information from the environments you shoot in, which is a bummer. And our transition test, moving from dark to bright and back, changes to brightness are handled very well. It's a very pleasant blooming effect and it's really subtle, but the white balance shifts with a bit more of a pop. Panning shots are tricky on most phones, but moving from bright back to dark as the shutter speed changes, we see a bit more of a shimmer than we'd like. And slowing things down for a second, Google absolutely nails slow motion video. This is the best slow-mo footage I've seen from any phone, and I'm very happy to see how easy it is to switch from 120 frames per second to 240 frames per second right in the app without leaving the viewfinder while composing your shot. Consider yourself on notice, Apple. This is terrific. So let's wrap this up. Where's that leave us with the camera on the Google Pixel XL? Is it the bestest camera ever? No, we can't say that it is, but it's pretty darn good. For the folks out there who want a streamlined shooter, especially those who prefer to not manipulate settings, the Pixel delivers very good results. You point, you hit the shutter, you get good vivid color. On the fly like that, this really is a fun camera to shoot with. Philosophically though, we just can't declare a camera the best if it ignores the shooters in our audience stepping up to more advanced composition. The people who do enjoy adjusting settings as they're trying to capture something specific. Like how out of the box, I can't show you a long exposure freeway shot from the Pixel. There's no option for shutter speed. I viscerally disagree with any statement in a review made along the lines of, "But most people don't shoot that way." I find that to be reductive and more than a little insulting. There's a wide gamut of people using phone cameras, and I think people will rise to the quality of the tool they're given. The Pixel offers precious little room to grow in that area until someone is motivated to stray from Google software. I personally just won't trust auto modes to achieve my vision until I can telepathically communicate with my cameras. The Pixel is a fun camera, but I can't rely on it for work like I might some of its competition. Adding to that philosophical issue a viewfinder which won't always properly frame my composition, mono audio when capturing video, and some of the worst lens flaring we've seen on an expensive flagship device, and the Pixel falls short of Google's boasts. We'll give you an A for effort, Google, but in execution, there's room for improvement. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more real camera and real audio reviews. We can't continue these in-depth reviews without your support, so sharing on your favorite social networks is greatly appreciated. For Pocketnow, I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, author of Take Better Photos, Smartphone Photography for Noobs. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Some Gadget Guy, and I will catch you all on the next review.